Hey guys, Zomfox here, and today we're going to be doing a video which I probably should have done a month or two ago, but hey, as the saying goes, better late than never. And that is looking back at my 2024 UFL season predictions and seeing just how good I did. Now, this is not just going to be on my overall standings predictions or anything like that. As you can see by the thumbnail, I have two thumbnails because we're doing both what I just mentioned, but also my attendance and TV rating predictions. This is something that I've been requested by a couple of times, mainly Nope's been wanting this for a while. And again, this is something I meant to do, but I just never got around to it. But now that I got extra time in the off season to make content, I figured that this is something that should have been out a month or two ago, but it's time to do it now. So again, we're looking at exactly how close I was on my predictions. Was I right? Was I wrong? What factors came into me being right or wrong? What things happened and all that. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Again, I've got links in the description to these original videos. And I'm going to have timestamps for both my season predictions and my standings predictions, as well as my attendance and viewership predictions if you only want to see one of those two things. So without further ado, let's get started with my goals for the 2024 UFL season predictions. Now, this was the viewership and attendance, essentially guesses or predictions, whatever you want to call it, goals I had. Now, when you look at it, the opening game viewership, 2 million, regular season viewership average, 800K, overall attendance, 20K per game minimum and 15K average, with a postseason viewership average of 1.25 million and a championship of 2 million. This is, let's just say, kind of a mixed bag in what ended up coming true. Now, the first one I want to talk about is the viewership, because the viewership I was actually somewhat close in on a couple of areas. Now, in the opening game, I was not close. Now, the reason I put the guess of 2 million is because even with the XFL 3.0, we had seen constantly that the first initial game of a new league always did really solid. Now, I was expecting the UFL's first game to do so well because of the fact that it was not only a new league, but it was the fact that it had the championship versus or champion versus champion sort of mantra, banner, whatever you want to call it. Right? It was the USFL Stallions against the XFL Renegades, a big grudge match between the two champions of the 2023 Spring Football League season, and it didn't even hit 1.5. Now, the one good thing with the UFL was that the second game actually did better than it, which I talked about in week one, was incredible to see. But yeah, the opening game viewership was definitely a disappointment. Now, the average actually was just around what I predicted. I said the goal was 800K average. The UFL hit a 900K average. The .9 average just barely was higher than 800K, and my guess was based on common sense, right? A bunch of games on Fox, a bunch of games on ABC, and most of your, network games being on ESPN instead of ESPN2, FS1, USA, and FX, which the XFL and USFL have been on a ton of those games. So the average being high was good. Now, in terms of the postseason average viewership, it was a little bit weird. My guess was 1.25 for the average. The postseason did way better than that. One game didn't hit 1.2, but the average of the conference finals was 1.2, and when you add in the championship, it was better than that. But the championship game did not hit the 2 million, which I kind of anticipated it would. Now, it's not to say it was bad by any means. It was still overall the most viewed game of the entire season. When you look at the season as a whole, you had a few games that were 1 million, 1.2 million, like that game in week 6. There were two 1 million games. But the championship was the most viewed game of the season, which was something I basically predicted. I said it would be tied with the opening game. So that one was kind of right. So in viewership, I was kind of like 50%-ish right. Yeah. I was right about the average postseason viewership being higher than 1.25. I was wrong about the championship. I was right about the overall average, but I was really wrong about the opener. So in terms of the overall viewership average, I actually think I did a pretty decent job in guessing what was going to end up happening. I just put a bit too much hype into that initial game, but aside from that, it was overall pretty similar to what I expected. Now, the attendance was a different story, right? The attendance not only did it not hit that 10K minimum per game, but it did not hit 15K as an average. Now, this is one of those where it's kind of twofold on my predictions being wrong. On one hand, there's the group which are me just having bad predictions. Essentially, me just doing things that, in hindsight, I should have known weren't going to happen. And the other hand are just guesses that were wrong. Now, the guesses that were wrong were obviously the USFL teams. We did not know the official attendance number. We had to guess all those games. It's very obvious that the guesses I had or estimated were higher than what they actually were. And so those games really did really poor, right? The Michigan Panthers attendance went up from 2023 according to Mike Mitchell, yet they still finished at an 8K average. Now, on the other hand is the Houston Roughnecks. The Roughneck situation is one I should have seen coming, considering the fact that of all the spring football YouTubers, I was the number one guy saying that the whole decision to rebrand the Gamblers as the Roughnecks was insanely stupid. I was the guy saying it. I said you either keep them as the Roughnecks and make it a 5-3 merger, or you keep them as the Gamblers and just tell Houston, too bad, so sad. Doing it was not going to make anyone really happy. It didn't. Now, twofold, they downgraded their stadium from TDECU to Rice Stadium this past season. So that was two reasons right there where I should have seen coming that their attendance was going to be under 10K. Now, that's before even mentioning the fact that the team ended up being terrible. But just the factors alone that I just mentioned, I should have seen that coming, that they would have not had 10K. But then again, the USFL teams with, of course, mainly Memphis and Michigan, was just me not being able to tell exactly how much, the official attendance was, of course, because of the announced attendance being much higher than actual attendance in a lot of games. So a lot of guesses just didn't age well. And of course, the 15K is hurt by that, but also that we did see a massive drop-off in teams like the Renegades, the Defenders, not really, but the Renegades, had a decent drop-off in attendance. The Brahmas were a bit less. So in terms of attendance, there were some hits taken there, but again, it wasn't like the average attendance was far worse than 15K, but that one I was definitely wrong about. Now on to the season predictions, and this is, let's just say this did not age well, right? So when you look at the USFL predictions here, you realize that it did not age well, like I just said. Look, my weekly predictions were really good this year. My season predictions were not good at all. I was right about the Stallions winning the conference. That was the only one I was right about. Now, I had them going 7-3. I was right about them going 3-1 against the XFL conference. I was dead on right with that one. But the Roughnecks finishing second to last, the Panthers last. Everybody talks about the Brahmas, how I had them finishing like 3-7. I had the Panthers finishing 3-7, and like nobody talks about it. So, yeah, this did not age well. Now, of course, the Showboats were because they were the failure. They were like the Tampa Bay Bandits of this year. They were a team that had a lot of on-paper talent and success that they should have had, and it just never worked. It worked for like one half in week one, and then it never looked good again. Now, the overall standings were, of course, far different. The Panthers' record was flipped from what I had. The Stallions won 2 more games, but still did win the conference, which I expected. The Roughnecks did not make the playoffs, and the Showboats did not make the playoffs. Neither team even won 4 games. So USFL prediction-wise, I was totally off, and it really is because I just had a lot more faith in the talent on those two teams. The defensive line, I talked about my 5 most disappointings, or 5 biggest disappointments of this past season. The Roughnecks D-line was supposed to be a lot better than it was. I firmly believe they were going to be very much like the 2022 Gamblers, a team that lived and died on their defense, but had an offense that would sometimes just screw them over. That did not happen. The defense was not nearly as good as it should have been, mainly that D-line. Now, the Showboats, I've talked enough about them. Massive disappointment. I've got multiple videos where I basically just crushed the Showboats. They were the biggest disappointment of the league this past season. I don't want to go back into it. Just completely wrong. But the Panthers, they were a lot better than I expected, and the XFL is the same way in that regard. The Brahmas were a lot better than I expected. The Brahmas also flipped the record I expected. Now, the one caveat to this one, my Defenders pick can't be viewed in a negative light. I know, a lot of these predictions were terrible, but this is the one I should get some, a pass on. This video was made before Abram Smith tore his ACL. The Abram Smith injury was the single biggest injury of the entire season. It was worse than any of the Michigan Panthers QB injuries. It was worse than the Garbers injury, worse than the McCarron injury, because this was a starting running back, a top-tier elite running back getting hurt for the whole season. The Defenders needed him. I said it the second he got hurt, the team was going to be a lot different. Their running back position was weak the entire year, and I first guessed it was going to suck as soon as he went down. So that injury is why they ended up doing a lot worse than expected. And I firmly believe if Abram Smith was healthy, there is a shot they would have gone 7-3. Was Te'amu that good this year? No. Did they look like they had a competent coach in Reggie Barlow this year? Not really. But both of them would have looked much better if Smith was healthy. So this one, I think I deserve a pass on because of the fact that the injury happened after. The other 3, well, the Renegades, I was pretty much somewhat close on right. They were 2 field goals away from being 5-5, so it's not like that was a terrible prediction. But playoff-wise, yeah, it did not age well. The Battlehawks were a better team than I expected, mainly because their defense ended up being a lot better than I thought, whereas their offense was worse than I thought it was going to be. But the team was definitely better than I expected. It was, again, they were a much better team than I really expected them to be, and so I gotta say, I was really wrong in the XFL conference in that regard as well. Really, the Stallions were the only team I was right on in their position of the standings. The Defenders, again, I think I deserve a pass on because of when this came out in the injury. But the Brahmas, Panthers, yikes, those takes aged horribly. The Showboats take aged poorly. The Battlehawks take aged poorly. Renegades, not so much. But man, I had one that you give a pass to in the Defenders, one that kind of aged okay in the Renegades, one that aged good with the Stallions, and then every other take I had about my predictions was horrific. Now, the playoffs, it gets even worse. I had the Showboats winning the championship, so this was terrible, right? I mean, look, I've had a lot of predictions this year that were right. This was not one of them, okay? This wasn't even like I was somewhat wrong. This was horrific. Again, DC, massive caveat. This was before Amos Smith was hurt. But, man, I had the Showboats winning the championship. That is just awful to see. Of course, because of the fact that I was the guy that during the year kept saying that the Stallions were going to just win the championship until they got proven they weren't the best team. Right? I mean, like, midway through the season, I was, like, fully on that. Is anyone going to be able to stop them? I don't think so. And then looking at before the season, I had them losing in the opening round is just terrible. Of course, the Stallions went on to win the championship, and the Brahmas made it to the championship game. The team I had finishing as the worst team in the XFL Conference made it to the championship game, and the team that I had finishing as the worst USFL team ended up giving the Stallions their best fight in the 2 playoff games. So, that was bad. Again, you take some, you win some, you lose some, as the saying goes. I lost these predictions. I won a lot of my regular season weekly predictions. Like I said before, my weekly predictions for this past UFL season was the best I've done in the 3 years I've been doing them by a country mile. So I'll take that. I had some really good Super 6 picks during the year, but man, these predictions for the season were terrible. But overall, that'll do it. This has been ZomFox. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. Let me know down below what your predictions were before the season, if you remember them. And again, let me know if you want to see this again next year, except, obviously closer to when the season ended instead of 2.5 months after the season ended. Quick side note as well, for those of you who are in my fantasy football league. Now, this is my hat I got, but I did get the Championship Stallions hat, which is the first place prize winner for the fantasy football league. And I have this with other stuff for my 1,000 subscriber giveaway. This is my hat that I got for myself. As I said before, if I win the fantasy football league, second place will get the prize. So that is in hand for when the league ends in a few months, as an FYI. Again, though, thank you all for watching. We're getting closer and closer to 900 subscribers. We're at 863, I believe, when I'm recording this. So we're getting on the way there. And as always, guys, have a great night.